I am so excited to share that you can now watch all of my upcoming podcasts on my brand new YouTube channel for the What Now podcast. So many of you have asked for more video content, and now you can watch these powerful conversations face to face. Every story, every testimony, every moment of faith and resilience, you'll now find it all on YouTube. So I'll be posting more of my episodes there, along with new short clips and deeper insights to help strengthen your faith and remind you that you are never alone on this journey. I invite you to subscribe on my YouTube channel at Podcast What Now. That's at Podcast What Now, so you never miss an episode.
This is the What Now Podcast.
In this episode of the What Now Podcast, I sit down with Austin Fife, author of the Light and Truth Letter, to talk about his journey from a personal faith crisis to rebuilding a deeper, more thoughtful testimony. Austin shares how a pivotal moment with his wife led him on a 10-year search for truth, where he set out to find something greater, only to discover that the answers he was looking for kept pointing him back to the gospel of Jesus Christ. We discuss the complexity of the Book of Mormon, why it continues to challenge critics, and how questions can actually strengthen faith when approached with honesty and patience. Austin also shares powerful insights on navigating doubt, recognizing misinformation, and learning how to think clearly in a world full of competing narratives.
This is the What Now Podcast.
Today I'm here with Austin Fife. Welcome.
Thanks for having me.
It's great to have you on today. I read your book, The Light and Truth Letter. I was actually out to lunch with my cousin. He said, you have got to read this book. It is so good at confirming just all the truths in the Book of Mormon, answering all the issues that people have. And I just thought, okay, I'm going to order it on Amazon. And I read it and I thought, yep, you're right. I need to interview Austin Fife. So I just want to ask you, what inspired you to write The Light and Truth Letter?
Yeah, so for those who haven't read my book or seen my story yet, I had a faith crisis in 2014 and confronted my wife and told her that, I no longer believed in God. And in the moment that I told her, I was expecting her to panic or cry or something. I don't know. She took a thoughtful pause and she said, I'm a member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints because this is where I found the most light and truth. And if you can find more light and truth outside of the church, I'll follow you. And so that set me off on this journey to find something more true, something better than what I already had. And so the Light and Truth Letter is it's the culmination of, I wrote it in 2024. So it's the culmination of a 10-year journey. My journey's still ongoing, but it's the observations I've made along the way, some of the questions that I've asked. So that's my story. I started writing it in February of 2024, and then published in August of 2024.
I mean, you really do touch on a lot of things that are concerning to people in the church. And so we'll get into some of that. So, I mean, when someone begins researching the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, why do you believe the Book of Mormon becomes the central question for them?
Well, Joseph Smith referred to the Book of Mormon as the keystone of our religion, which is a useful claim because that means it is the centerpiece, right? Everything hinges, I should say everything. I mean, pretty much everything hinges on whether or not the Book of Mormon is what it claims to be, which is why that's what critics spend most of their time critiquing and criticizing is the Book of Mormon, because if the Book of Mormon isn't what it claims to be, that's a difficult position for members of the church to be in. And so I'm trying to remember what your original question was, but yeah, it's the keystone of our religion. That's why it's an important place for critics to attack us, and it's an important place for us to be able to defend ourselves.
Yeah, and it's interesting too, because in the Book of Mormon, there's a lot of complexity there that someone who had such a simple education like Joseph Smith from such a remote area, I mean, how would he even have access to understanding all these things that he put into the Book of Mormon? Like, why would the presence of something like chiasmus be difficult to explain if the Book of Mormon were simply a story that Joseph Smith invented in 1829?
Yeah, what's strange to me is comparing Joseph Smith in 1829 to Joseph Smith in 1838. 1844 when he passed away. So there's a 15-year difference. 15 years later, he has followers, I mean, smart people who are part of the church. He's taught hundreds of sermons at this point. He's given hundreds of micro scriptures, right, in Doctrine and Covenants and in other places. He's been studying Hebrew, right? So Joseph Smith, 15 years after the Book of Mormon was published, I think somebody who had 15 years and time and resources and people and knowledge, I don't know, maybe someone like that. Honestly, I still don't think he could write the Book of Mormon, but that would make more sense if it was the capstone of his ministry. And yet it's how he kicks off his ministry. He goes from nothing. There's no lead up. There's no precedent. It just, the Book of Mormon explodes onto the scene as Joseph Smith's first creative work. And it's just so unusual because of who he was, uneducated. Now, when we say uneducated, I mean, he had some formal education. We call it third grade. He wasn't a third grader. I mean, he was more educated than that, but still, I mean, he wasn't like Harvard educated or something like that. He didn't have the resources. He didn't have the experience. He didn't have the skill. He didn't have a lot of things you would need in order to translate the Book of Mormon, let alone translate it, in such a short period of time. And so you mentioned chiasmus. For your audience who may not be familiar, chiasmus is a Hebraism. Hebraisms are, they're like fingerprints of Hebrew that remain even after you've translated into another language, right? And a common Hebraism is a chiasmus, where it's a inverted parallel poetic structure, where it's hickory dickory dock, the mouse went up the clock struck one. What's the other line I always forget?
The mouse ran down, hickory dickory dock.
Yeah, so it follows a pattern, and then it repeats itself in reverse order. And you find these in the Book of Mormon, particularly in Alma 36, which is, in my mind, the most beautiful and complicated chiasmus in all of Scripture, including the Bible. And, it follows Alma the Younger, his journey down to hell, and then being rescued by Christ, and then coming back out. And it follows the structure, and the center of the poem is Jesus Christ. And it's just it's a beautiful illustration of like a complicated and involved chiasmus that is near impossible to just make up. Because you could, I suppose, come up with a chiasmus just on accident, but it'd have to be a really simple one. To do something like that, I mean, it's a tricky position for critics to explain, which is a lot of what the Light and Truth letter is. It's, when I was considering leaving the church, I had a lot of questions, and that's a lot of what my Light and Truth letter is. It's like, how do you explain some of these things?
Yeah. I mean, it's true, because the Book of Mormon, it contains multiple layers of narrative, like Mormon abridging earlier records and Nephi quoting Isaiah and prophets referencing previous writings. And yet the story remains remarkably coherent. For someone who's not a very seasoned, exceptionally trained writer, how would they even do that? I mean, someone like Joseph Smith, wasn't he known as illiterate, right? None.
Not inexperienced. We're talking no experience.
Yeah. I mean, it's interesting. It's interesting to note that Joseph Smith dictated the entire Book of Mormon without notes or outlines. I mean, how does that level of complexity challenge the idea that it was simply improvised?
Yeah, and critics have kind of moved targets over the years. Originally, critics dismissed the Book of Mormon as just nonsense, right? It's just gibberish. This is blasphemous, just nonsense. But that didn't work very long, because people started reading it and started seeing just how beautiful the Book of Mormon is and how detailed and complex it is. So then critics had to move targets and shift to something else. So then they came up with theories of, okay, well, somebody else wrote the Book of Mormon, right? We don't know who, but somebody more educated. So then you have theories like the Solomon Spaulding theory, or some people believe that like Sidney Rigdon wrote the Book of Mormon, which would be really, really cool, because he'd be converted by the book that he supposedly wrote, right? And so there are these different theories about somebody else must have written the Book of Mormon, but then over time, all of those theories have gone away. And so critics have been stuck for a little while, but their most recent one, I think, is the most bold. It's just Joseph Smith, as is, could have written the Book of Mormon. Like any 1830s farmer in their early 20s with limited life experience, right? Haven't traveled out of, the upper, New York, Vermont, that section of the country. Somebody who's not very well traveled, not very well educated, no writing experience, dictating experience. I mean, very little, like, obviously he was religious, but like preaching sermons and doing all that, but like very little, like that's their new theory, is that basically anyone in the 1830s could have written something like this. And I think it's the most absurd one of all, but that's the one that critics land on today, is that basically pretty much anyone could have written this. And I think that's just absurd.
It is absurd. I mean, another interesting aspect you discuss is the ancient naming patterns in the Book of Mormon, like Sariah and Nephi, Abish and Alma, and they follow Semitic patterns. And for years, critics, they claimed Alma was a female Latin name, yet later discovered showing Alma was actually a male Semitic name used in antiquity. So why are these discoveries so significant?
Yeah, I mean, Alma is a good example of an anachronism. An anachronism is something out of place in time. And so that was one of the things that critics made fun of the Book of Mormon and Joseph Smith about. It's like, Alma is not a male's name in any culture. And yet you have Alma as your male prophet who takes up a big chunk of the Book of Alma. Har, har, har. Yeah, you're so dumb. Like you didn't even know this. Only to come find out later, we're digging up like, in fact, I wrote it down. What's it called? The Bar Kokhba letters. They discovered them in 1961, where they discovered it was an Alma, son of Judah, in ancient Israel. I think in Egypt, in a colony that was an Israelite colony in Egypt, I believe is the location. But it's like, how did Joseph Smith know that Alma was used anciently as, a male Israelite name? And so it's just weird things like this. When I was considering leaving the church, that really bothered me because I didn't know the answer. I'm like, so if Joseph Smith made this up, like why are we finding these things? Why are we finding Egyptian patterns and Egyptian names in the Book of Mormon? Why are we finding, Sariah, Alma, these different names? Why does, Nephi, in the Book of Nephi, he talks about being born of goodly parents, and he repeats the theme of goodly and good. And then you find out that Nephi is connected to the word good in ancient Hebrew. And so it's like,
you're like, I can't make this up.
Yeah. Where is he coming up with this stuff? And so, yeah.
And then it's been proven so much later that it's accurate.
Right.
And he was so determined to stay faithful to that. I mean, some researchers have analyzed writing patterns and linguistic fingerprints in the Book of Mormon and found distinct voices between authors like Nephi and Alma and Mormon and Moroni. Why is this particularly interesting when we remember Joseph Smith dictated the entire book in such a short period of time?
Yeah. So Joseph Smith, the version of the Book of Mormon we have today was translated between, I think it's April, I'm trying to remember the day, because we know Oliver Cowdery visited Joseph Smith in April, and then April 3rd or 2nd or something like that. And then 3 days later, they started translating. So from early April to the last week of June, they translated the Book of Mormon, so 90 days. But between travel time and going to Harmony and Palmyra, likely the actual translation took place somewhere in like the range of like 60 days when you count, when you're not counting Sundays, right? They weren't translating on Sundays and travel time and all that. So 60 to 90 days, Joseph Smith, out of nowhere, the Book of Mormon explodes onto the scene with no lead up, no precedent. And then we're finding these weird things, like in the Book of Mormon, you have these different authors, right? We have Nephi speaking for a while. Then we have his brother for a few chapters. We have obviously Mormon. His voice is all over the Book of Mormon. Then we have Jesus Christ himself speaking during certain parts. And so we have all these different speakers and writers throughout the Book of Mormon. And, until recently, we just read the Book of Mormon. But with computing power, you're able to actually sparse out and separate like who's speaking because they follow certain patterns. So, for example, when you read Second Nephi, if you compare Nephi to Jacob, they have distinct patterns of how they speak. Like, and this is all from John Hilton III's book, Voices in the Book of Mormon.
Mm-hmm.
But, Jacob speaking in, or Nephi speaking in, I think, well, we have Lehi in chapter 1 and 2 of Second Nephi, but we have Nephi speaking after that, and he prefers to use the word, in fact, I wrote it down. I think so Jacob favors God, naming God, and Nephi favors Lord. And when you read those chapters, you can identify that Jacob really favors God, and Nephi favors the word Lord to refer to the ultimate creator, right?
Interesting.
So then you have 2 chapters in 4 and 5 where Jacob's going God, 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 God. And then Nephi before that saying Lord, 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 Lord. And then after is going Lord, 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 Lord. And they switch back and forth in these chapters where it's Nephi versus Jacob. But from Joe Smith's perspective, he's just dictating. It's like, how is he able to sparse out these different voices, different styles, even from chapter to chapter? It's just incredible. And you find this over the Book of Mormon, not just like different authors who have different styles. You have intertextuality, like Alma the Younger speaking to his son Korihor, and he's referencing things that Abinadi spoke about like hundreds of pages earlier. He's quoting this great prophet Abinadi to his son Korihor hundreds of pages later. And it's like that sort of like intertextuality you find throughout the Book of Mormon. It's just like, how? This is incredible. This is amazing.
Right.
Like, how
There's
did he
no
pull
way.
this off in 60 days or 90 days? Even if he had years to think about it, it's unbelievable.
It is unbelievable. I mean, one of the most astonishing aspects of the Book of Mormon is that it was written in 90 days.
Yeah.
I mean, how in the world would he have written that in 90 days? I mean, it was roughly 580 pages, and it was dictated without any drafts. I mean, witnesses said Joseph could stop dictating, take a break, resume exactly where he left off without rereading the previous text. I mean, why do historians consider this translation timeline so remarkable?
Well, Brian Hales, I don't think he wrote a book on it, but I know he's given a speech on it and he's written a paper on it. But Brian Hales, he compares different 19th century authors to Joseph Smith. So he compares like their age, book length, composition timeline, education. So he compares these different factors that you would look at when evaluating an author. And in essentially every category, Joseph Smith is the outlier or one of the outliers. Like the book was written really fast. He was really young, and it was his first creative work, right?
Great.
So you've got all these, and then complexity, everything else. So you have all these things that Joseph Smith is the outlier, but when you add them all up, it's like there's no one else like him when you factor in all of these factors together. And so what critics do is they have to bend over backwards to explain this. They start with the presupposition that Joseph Smith, there are no angels, there's no prophets, there's no God. Well, and I say critics, I mean like atheist critics. They start with or I guess evangelical critics. They may say Joseph Smith is a false prophet. So then we have the Book of Mormon, though. We can read it and we know a lot about it. And so they have to explain it. And so then they have to bend over backwards to come up with explanations. It's like, well, these other authors also wrote books really quickly. It's like, well, yeah, I mean, the guy was in his 50s, had written like 15 books, and that book is like a quarter the length of the Book of Mormon. Right. Or these other authors were really young. And it's like, okay, yeah, but so it's like no matter which way, they have to bend over backwards and really play mental gymnastics to come up with a narrative as to how the Book of Mormon came to be. And just when you put it together, it's just absurd. And then that's what bothered me so much now over 10 years ago, as I was looking to leave the church and do something different, better. It was like, man, in fact, the Book of Mormon haunted me. I just couldn't wrap my mind around it. For a time, I didn't believe it was the word of God, but it was like, but how do we have it? So, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, that's the thing for me. I mean, I have people coming to me and saying, I'm thinking about leaving the church and they have issues with this, that, and the other. I'm like, do you believe the Book of Mormon's true? Because there is no way Joseph Smith wrote that. I mean, that is an inspired work.
Right.
And that's, the cornerstone of the gospel of Jesus Christ, right? That's the capstone. That's the central thing that we can focus on, the keystone. Thank you. That's the keystone of our religion. And really, if that's true, then there are prophets. There is divine inspiration. I mean, so many amazing things are possible if that book is true. So I can see why that is on attack all the time by our critics.
Right.
But what your book is so good at doing is breaking down all these things we discussed, chiasmus, writing styles, the voices of these people in the scriptures, to prove that this is an inspired work. I mean, this is his first work as an unlearned man. He was known as an illiterate in his community. I mean, that's probably why Heavenly Father chose him, right? There is no doubt this wasn't written by him.
Well, and let me add one thing. I don't think anything in my book proves anything about the Book of Mormon. My main goal wasn't to prove that the Book of Mormon is definitely an ancient record. It was more to illustrate that the story is more complicated than critics are apt to suggest. There's just more out there. And so I start with the assumption that the Book of Mormon is not a divinely inspired work. And then the Light and Truth letter is, okay, so then how do I explain these different things? And if it's not the Word of God, if it's not divinely inspired ancient record, I don't exactly know what to do with it. But I don't think anything in my book proves that the Book of Mormon is definitely, an ancient record. But that was never my goal. My goal was to give people who have left the church or seriously doubting a little room to breathe. It's like, okay, you were given a story about the Book of Mormon. Well, look at this weird thing in the Book of Mormon, and it's obviously false or whatever. And I was just trying to paint a bigger picture for those folks who have left or like having serious doubts that there's more to this story. I don't think anything I say proves that the Book of Mormon is true, but it gives somebody who wants to know the truth enough space to ultimately search for the source of light and truth, which is not my book. It's God himself. And so, but sometimes people can't even get on their knees to pray because they've been told all these things from critics. And so they're just not in a position where they could even pray to get an answer. And so I hope that my book gives those folks some space to breathe and think and consider.
I know, it's great. I mean, today, really many members encounter criticism of the church online. I mean, sometimes for the first time. How can people learn to distinguish fair questions from misinformation or these incomplete narratives?
That is a super good question. And I don't talk about it in the Light and Truth letter. And so I'm going to shamelessly plug my next book. I got a copy right here.
Good.
It's called Bring Forth the Best Robe. I would say the Light and Truth letter is the culmination of my journey. This isn't like a precursor to the Light and Truth letter. They're two different books. But I was talking to a friend about this book, and he pointed out that it is kind of a precursor. This new book is written for members of the church who have loved ones who are experiencing doubt. So how to support a loved one experiencing doubt. And so a lot of it is, listening and being empathetic. And so it's more like the emotional side, but some of it is the critical thinking side, like helping a loved one or even yourself process things that are troubling. And so I have a whole section called Navigate New Information. And so what do you do, right? When you hear something you've never heard before, and it's like, man, I've never heard that before. That sounds terrible. What do you do with that? Well, what I talk about in that chapter is when you hear something new you've never heard before, it's one of four things. One, it's either totally false. Like it's not like Latter-day Saints have horns, right? It's just like not true at all, right? And in my mind, critics who use like blatant falsehoods are more like the Christian critics who aren't actually trying to engage seriously with Latter-day Saints. They're just trying to poison the well, right?
Yeah.
They just don't want their congregation to even consider the Latter-day Saints because they're evil, wicked, going to hell devils sort of thing, right? So that's one. If you heard something, it's either totally not true at all, or two, it is true, and it's uncomfortably true. It's like, you learn something. It's like, oh man, that's different than what I thought. And that's kind of uncomfortable. There are some things in our history and church policy that's uncomfortable and we have to grapple with. But what we talk about is that there are plenty of people, smart, intelligent, faithful people who have navigated these waters and found a path forward. Those two I just mentioned, I think, are the least common. I think the most common is the third. You hear something that's true, but it's being presented with a cynical narrative. And so it's the narrative doing the heavy lifting. And so I talk about you have to scrutinize like how much of this is the actual facts and how much of it is the story being told about the facts. So if somebody asks you a question that's preloaded with presuppositions and assumptions, that could change the whole question itself. And then the fourth thing, when you hear something you've never heard before, sometimes or oftentimes it's a claim about something we can't know. We can't know what was in somebody's mind on a particular day, right? From 200 years ago. And so claims sometimes are being made about things that we couldn't possibly know, right? And so that's what I talk about in this next, that's not what the book's about. It's just a chapter in the book. But when you hear something new that you've never heard before, remember, it's either not true, it's true, and you have to grapple with it. Most likely it's true, but like the story is doing the heavy lifting, or it's just simply unknowable. We can't really know it. This is a long rant. Can I keep going?
No, this is great.
Okay. I don't talk about this in the book, but with the publisher, the Stick of Joseph boys, the Plain Precious Publishing, when you order the book, you get bonus content. And I talk about this in the bonus content, but after I'd written the book, I came up with this idea that I'm really starting to latch onto that I think is more related to your question. In fact, I wrote it down just so I wouldn't forget. I talk about, in the bonus content, I talk about the doubt pipeline, because your question wasn't about claims. Your question was about, what if I think you said something like, what if you hear a question and it's about something you never heard before, something like that.
And how to distinguish kind of these fair questions
Yes.
from misinformation
Yeah.
and incomplete narratives. Because it seems like a lot of critics, they take these incomplete narratives and they take it out of context.
Right.
They add this weird music and they make it something totally different. You're like, that is so inaccurate.
You're right. So I talk about the doubt pipeline because you and I both know that questions are good. I mean, our church started with a sincere question, a difficult question, right? I'm not talking just like a breezy question. Like Joseph Smith was asking a challenging gospel question. And so challenging gospel questions can be the catalyst for spiritual growth. And yet some people, they get really nervous when their loved ones start asking questions because they've seen other loved ones ask questions and they left the church. And so I've come up with this idea I call the doubt pipeline, where it starts with a question, which is good, but then critics create or exploit poor assumptions. We were just talking about that a minute ago, right? It's asking a question, but embedded in the question are a litany of cynical or assumptions that kind of lead the truth seeker to where the critic wants them to go, right? So you create or exploit poor assumptions, and then you shape cynical narratives. And so you're asking a question, but you're shaping a narrative around the question, again, to lead, it's the pipeline, it's the doubt pipeline, to lead your victim to where you want them to go in doubt. And then from there, you build distrust in the church. You get, why didn't the church tell me concerns, questions that critics want you to think about and want to exploit in you. And then from there, in my experience, not all former members, but some former members participate in what I call exaggerated hindsight or memory distortion, where their experience with the church becomes more negative in hindsight than it perhaps actually was. It's not to say no one has a bad experience, no one suffers any abuse or anything like that. I'm not saying that, but I do find it unusual and unsettling when former members who I know had a great experience in the church and are largely thriving today because of their upbringing suddenly see the church as this like evil, awful, abusive. They're essentially, they made up a church out of wholesale, right? That's not actually reflective of the actual church or even the church they experience. And then the last step in the pipeline that critics use is poisoning the well of faithful resources. So they don't want you to find or consider the resources that would actually answer your question. And so I call it the doubt pipeline. It's not really in my book, but I think it addresses what you talk about questions being shaped by poor assumptions, cynical narratives that lead somebody to distrust the church and then ultimately poison the well of faithful resources that could potentially bring them back.
Yeah, and create their own narrative that is inaccurate.
Right. Yeah, correct.
Yeah, that's interesting. I mean, I want to go back into the kind of historical linguistic part of the Book of Mormon. I mean, after studying that, the archaeological evidence surrounding the Book of Mormon, I mean, what do you personally feel is the strongest indication that the book is what it claims to be?
We haven't really talked about it yet, but to me, it's actually the witnesses. I think the witnesses are the strongest evidence that the Book of Mormon is what Joseph Smith claimed it was. There are 11 formal witnesses, and then there's many other informal witnesses, people who saw a corner of the plates or whatever, right? We have several informal witnesses, friend and foe, by the way. And what's amazing about the witnesses is none of them ever recanted, ever.
Right.
Some of these people were excommunicated, right? They were kicked out of the church. Sidney Rigdon was fearful for his life in Missouri, but never recanted his testimony of the Book of Mormon, what he saw, and none of the other witnesses as well. Some of them, at the point of at great personal cost to themselves, they maintain their testimony of the Book of Mormon with seemingly no reason to, if it was all just a fraud and Joseph Smith made it up. And that's critics. I've heard some, I have actually not really followed critics when they talk about why is it that all these followers continued to lie for Joseph Smith? I've never found it very convincing.
Right.
It seems like these witnesses were sincere people who made claims and stuck to those claims, and they're remarkably consistent their entire life. You have to get a third-hand source, and there's only a couple of them that claim that maybe the vision wasn't exactly what they thought it was. But then you have Martin Harris and Sidney Rigdon refuting those claims in their lifetime, right? And so it's to me, that is the strongest evidence. I guess within the Book of Mormon itself, so ignoring just in the Book of Mormon, to me is the falling anachronisms. We talked about anachronisms before. It was one of my biggest concerns about the Book of Mormon is these things that are seemingly out of place in time within the Book of Mormon. Critics talk a lot about horses, right? There's horses in the Book of Mormon, but people believe because of the Spanish conquest that there weren't horses in the Americas anciently, or at least during the time period of the Book of Mormon. The reason that's actually become one of the pillars of my testimony of the Book of Mormon is over the last 200 years, critics have lobbed over 200 alleged anachronisms at the Book of Mormon. The Book of Mormon talks about silk in the Americas, and we know there wasn't any silk. Or the Book of Mormon talks about Alma, right? We talked about that, and we know that Alma is a woman's name. And it talks about, so there's this litany of things that critics have made fun of the Book of Mormon and criticized the Book of Mormon for having that we know it was not in the Americas. And if you think about Joseph Smith, who's making this up, according to critics, he's a 23-year-old farmer with no experience. Indians are these little tribes that live in huts down the road. And yet he's talking about these grand civilizations that were organized, that had highways and roads and fought battles. And that was absurd in 1830. It's we know that ancient American indigenous peoples didn't have these things. And yet over time, what are we finding? A lot of these things that Joseph Smith said are actually proving to be more true over time. And so that list of anachronisms that was over 200 at one point is down to a very small amount today. So we haven't found everything.
Yeah.
But it's how did a 23-year-old uneducated farmer in 90 days dictate a book he claimed to be history, and it's proving more true as time goes on? That's absurd. And so to me, that is the strongest evidence for the Book of Mormon, is this book that explodes onto the scene as time goes, and we know hardly anything about the ancient American people, right?
Yeah.
The Spanish conquest absolutely obliterated these people. Plus, like, archaeology in the Americas is a lot more difficult than it is in the Middle East due to weather constraints and funding and all these different things. And so we know very little about the Americas, and yet all these things are proving true in the Americas. And so if there are any anachronisms in the Book of Mormon, just give it some time.
Yeah, it's compelling. I mean, I just feel like beyond evidence and scholarship, how has your study of the Book of Mormon strengthened your personal faith in Jesus Christ?
Yeah.
Jesus Christ is all throughout the Book of Mormon.
Yeah. So I talk about this in this next book. I think it's in a section called Ask of God toward the end of the book, because critics criticize, sometimes we as members talk about, you just pray and ask God to know if it's true, and then he'll tell you, and that's how you know if the Book of Mormon is true. And, atheist critics or Christian critics criticize us for that. And I actually think rightfully so. Because in my opinion, I don't think it's pray and ask to know if the Book of Mormon's true. I think there's actually more involved. If you read the verses around Moroni 4 and 5, like verses 3, and what's the other one? Verse, I think it's 6. It talks about Moroni 3. Behold, I would exhort you that when you read these things, if it be wisdom in God that you should read them, that you would remember how merciful the Lord has been unto the children of men, from the creation of Adam, even down to the time you shall receive these things, and ponder it in your hearts. And so Moroni is urging us to remember and ponder the Lord's mercy. And then in verse 6, he adds, whatsoever thing is good is just and true. Wherefore nothing that is good denieth the Christ, but acknowledgeth that he is. And so I jokingly say in the book, my understanding of Moroni's promise is read, apply the teachings of the Book of Mormon, and then see how my life changes. If necessary, pray. And I say that half jokingly, but I think the proof is in the pudding. It's in the fruits. We could parachute in thousands of Book of Mormon, copies of the Book of Mormon into some third world country that doesn't have the Book of Mormon in their language, and people's lives would get better. They would come closer to Christ. They would quit addictive habits. They would start harming each other. They would start helping each other. They would serve their neighbor more and better. And that is the miracle of the Book of Mormon, is that and this is what bothered me, is it made my life better and it brought me closer to Christ. And so regardless of the linguistic evidence, the archaeological evidence, everything that I talk about in my book, I think for me, the strongest evidence of the Book of Mormon isn't even that I once knelt by my bedside and prayed. It's that I've read and applied the teachings of the Book of Mormon, and my life is better. My life is different. My life is changed. I have peace. I feel closer to my spouse, to my children. I have a lot of light and truth in my life. And that is my ultimate testimony of the Book of Mormon, is that it works.
Amen. I mean, that's the thing. I mean, the proof is in the pudding, like you said. I mean, if your life is fundamentally better, you have peace, you have harmony in your life, you have direction, everything in the Book of Mormon, it's like a handbook to managing earth life. All the complexity, the family drama that's in there with Nephi and Lehi, and everybody has complexity in their life, hardship in their life, and how they dealt with it, how they got through it, helps all of us find peace in our life. I mean, when I'm going through hard things in my life, if I read a chapter of the Book of Mormon every day, things are better. It just dissipates some of the hard, right? It levels the playing field for a little bit. And I just feel like that's such an incredible tool and resource to bring peace and joy into our lives. I love what you said. I love everything that you've said today, and that you have taken the time and effort to spend 10 years on your own personal journey to write this down so we could all benefit from it. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
It's great to have you here today.
Thanks for having me.
This is the What Now Podcast.